the previous government had done was egregious. It had gone beyond every possible means in terms of jeopardizing the land security of the farmer. Lakhs of people, particularly those who formed the solid vote bank of the previous government, had been cheated out of their livelihood, out of their economy, out of their only source of asset. The data relating to domestic product, both at the national level and at the state level, has become very dodgy.
Yes.
I was inside his office, and when I sought to raise some of these issues, sanctity of contracts, following adherence to rule of law, making laws that consistent with the constitution, I was derided. I do believe that investors must now have confidence in this government. Mr. Naidu has a long track record, 30 plus years of track record of being investor friendly, understanding what it is for economic development to take place. So I do believe that things have changed, are changing, and will change for the better.
Hello and welcome to the Oneindia Pod View, where the most serious and constructive policy discussions are presented with a free-flowing and podcasty twist. Joining me today is an ex-bureaucrat, a lawyer, a doctor, and mind you, it doesn't end there. He's somebody who's held multiple senior roles in the corporate world, worked with world organizations like the World Bank and UN for 13 years. He's also somebody who teaches public policy to upcoming professionals. Joining me is Mr. PV Ramesh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in the first place. I've briefly introduced you, and I'll have to say that if I go on to explaining in detail, it'll be an endless process because of all that you've done in your life. First things first, now as we're going to dwell deeper into the policy issues concerning the state of Andhra Pradesh, I wouldn't go as far as saying they're only issues, but discussions. If you can give our viewers a little bit of brief about your stint apart from being an IS officer, what all have you done and what all roles have you held, so that it'll only connect the dots in terms of the discussion that we're going to have over the next half an hour or so.
Thank you, Akash. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I wish you all the best. It's a great beginning. As far as Andhra Pradesh state is concerned, I returned back from my international assignments in 2009, and I was Principal Health Secretary for 2.5 years. And thereafter, I was Principal Finance Secretary for 5 years, 2.5 years before the state divided and 2.5 years after the state divided. While I was Finance Secretary, I was also head of the state reorganization. Thereafter, I was ex officio Secretary to Chief Minister, State Development Commissioner. Then in 2016 December, I went to Delhi as the Chairman Managing Director of REC Limited. I was away for 2.5 years. And I returned back in 2019 to be the Special Chief Secretary to Mr. Jagan Mohan Reddy. And that was a role I continued till October 2020 when I opted to resign as an advisor. And thereafter I was not connected with the government. So in a way that my career with the government ended in 2020, and then I worked from 2009. Of course, before that I've held many assignments. After that, I've had many assignments. But since our focus is on Andhra Pradesh and my association with Andhra Pradesh, both before bifurcation, during bifurcation, and after bifurcation, so almost about 11, 12 years.
So as somebody who spent 11, 12 years in the system, working in multiple roles, like you just said, you were also the Finance Secretary. The Land Titling Act that was introduced is the first topic that firstly I'd like to talk about, because lately it's been making a lot of headlines. Was also a major poll issue in the recently concluded assembly elections. And we also saw that the Land Titling Act, when you survey the media or the mainstream media or the social media, had a huge impact in what eventually transpired into the election results. How do you look at the act? In the first place, how do you look at the act, and what is your analysis of what was done and the way it was executed?
Let's look at the entire spectrum of the land administration. in Andhra Pradesh vis-a-vis the land administration across the country.
Sure.
It's important in Andhra Pradesh because 60% of the people of Andhra Pradesh are directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture.
Yes.
And the remaining also are on the peri-urban areas. So in a way that Andhra Pradesh is predominantly driven by the economy that germinates from the land, either by cultivation or aquaculture or even housing for that matter. So it's important.
Yes.
Now let's understand how the land administration is designed. Now land administration originally was brought to India by Central Asians and particularly Sher Shah Suri when he was ruling India between Babur and the next Humayun. He actually introduced the administration. And during Akbar's time, the Todarmal, who was his revenue minister, he actually introduced what was called a settlement process, by which they said, because this was a feudal system, which meant you had Jagirdars, you had Zamindars, you had Maktadars. So you had different varieties of intermediaries. So they owned large chunks of land.
Yes.
So they would say that, this because land revenue was the main source of revenue to the government, and they had different ways of determining the land revenue. This was the administration that was in vogue till the British came to India. When British came to India in 1774, when they took over 1765, when actually the then Mughal emperor, he signed away at an treaty of Allahabad,
Yes.
in which he gifted away the authority to collect revenues of Central, Bengal, Bihar provinces, which included Odisha,
Yes.
the present day Odisha, to East India Company.
Yes.
Now in 1882, there was a formal settlement set up. This is important to understand.
To set the context right.
To set the context right, yeah. In 1882, the British set up, the East India Company had an administration by which they had a Governor General in Kolkata, and then there was a governor in Madras Presidency and a governor in Bombay Presidency, because these were the three major parts of the British domain. The British Crown took over Indian administration only in 1857, after the 57 revolt.
Yes.
Now, in 1784, Warren Hastings was the first Governor General, introduced what was then called as the permanent settlement.
Yes.
The permanent settlement was introduced in Bihar, Bengal, Central provinces, which includes today broadly Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Odisha.
So that's the Hindi belt and to an extent Bengal.
That's all. So the permanent settlement meant that you broadly determined the Zamindar area or Maktadar area. That means a Zamindar may have 10 villages, or Maktadar may have 20 villages, a Jagirdar may have 50 villages. So it was broadly settled. The settlement, the permanent settlement was, in the next 10 years, you need to pay as a Zamindar 1,000 rupees to the East India Company as the revenue. You do what you like. You collect money, you collect 10,000, you collect 20,000, but 1,000 is your responsibility to pay.
Is your tax in a way.
It is the land revenue, land tax.
Got it.
If it was an irrigated, you paid more.
Exactly.
It was more fertile, you had 2 crops, you paid twice as much.
Exactly.
So this was the arrangement. Now, in 1820, when Thomas Munro became the governor of Madras Presidency, he thought, by then of course much water had flown down the Ganga. Warren Hastings was impeached by the British Parliament.
Yes.
And Thomas Munro introduced what was called a Raitwari settlement in Madras Presidency. Later this was replicated in Bombay Presidency. So which basically meant the present Andhra Pradesh state, which was part of Madras Presidency, other than certain exceptions like few zamindaris, or there were certain inamdars, agraharams, except them, the entire land was settled in favor of the Rayat, who was cultivating the land.
Yes.
Now, while doing so, the forest boundaries were first determined, and then the cultivable land was determined. Then the house sites were identified saying this is Gramakantam.
Exactly.
And then there was certain lands earmarked for common purposes, for the future purposes, the wastelands.
For
the lands.
development, or you
So
can say
those were called the government
community
lands.
parks, etc.
Government lands, wastelands, some were which were not under cultivation. But every inch of the land was surveyed, settled, field measurement books were kept in place.
So just for the audience sake, which phase did this happen in? If you can.
This started around 1820.
Right.
And by 1851, the Rayatwari record was issued by the British.
And post that in 1857 was the first revolt.
And 57 was the first revolt. Then the British Crown took over, but the British administration continued. Way back in 1882 itself, the British Parliament passed legislation by which actually, though East India Company was administering India, the Parliament of Britain had overall control over the management of affairs
100%.
of the state of British India. So in a way, Andhra Pradesh state land settlement was completed in 1851. Thereafter, there were Andhra Pradesh land revenue rules. There were a series of legislations and series of protocols, codes, which determined how to determine what is the land, what is the field measurement book, what are the maps, how to update them, and there was a system called Jamabandi.
Yes.
Jamabandi meant every year you went through the village record and with the help of the Karanams, Patels, Karanams and Munsafs in Andhra area, Patels and Patwaris in Telangana area. Now, you went through the record, updated it. This was verified by the Tahsildar, by the sub-collector, by the joint collector, by the collector, and signed off.
And this was a recurring process. It's not like it was done once.
This was an annual process. It was updated annually.
Yes.
Now, Andhra Pradesh state, which was part of Madras presidency, is very different from that of Telangana. Telangana, which was part of the Hyderabad domain, which was Nizam's domain,
Yes.
had settlement only in 1935.
Got it.
And also because much of the land in Telangana was not under cultivation, they were classified as gut numbers.
Yes.
For example, Sheikhpet village, which Jubilee Hills, Banjara Hills today
Exactly.
form a part, had only one survey number, and it was all a government land. Every inch of land today, which is worth its value in gold,
Yes.
was those days was classified as a government land. So Telangana had a very different land administration, land survey system, land management system. I've had the benefit of working across both states.
Exactly.
I've been a revenue officer in Mehboob-nagar, in Warangal, in Karimnagar, in Adilabad, in Chittoor, in East Godavari, and in Vizag.
Exactly.
So, I have understanding of both the states. And the big difference was that in Telangana, the forest was part of the village boundary. So, village boundaries were not demarcated in Telangana.
Yes.
So, this also led to, so the administration was very different. So, when Niti Aayog came up with a legislation, much of the litigation in the country revolves around land.
Yes.
Land ownership, land titling, land boundaries.
Yes.
So, there are number of issues relating to the land ownership. There is not just between brothers and relatives, but between not only between neighbors, but also involving others.
Yes.
So this was because of the permanent settlement system, which did not settle the individual land holdings.
Exactly.
That was not the case with Andhra Pradesh. So the Niti Aayog prescription was not referring to Andhra Pradesh, it referred to India in general, particularly in those states that didn't have a Rayatwari settlement system. However, let me also put it this way, Andhra Pradesh as well, what has happened is, for various reasons, because land revenue was abolished, land revenue administration was not given importance because there was no more land revenue.
Exactly.
And consequently, the Jamabandi system had fallen by the wayside. And much more importantly, with the introduction of the digital records,
Yes.
and with the, and technology has a great role in terms of empowering, in terms of streamlining, in terms of bringing transparency, but technology could also result in grave disasters. In my view, the application of technology to land administration has resulted in grave disaster as far as both in Andhra by introduction of webland and Dharani portal in Telangana.
In Telangana.
Telangana. So I strongly believe that both the states need to go back. Telangana, there's a lot more work needs to be done. They need to go back to the manual record maintenance system. The farmers must be made aware of. But what the previous government had done was egregious. It had gone beyond every possible means in terms of jeopardizing the land security of the farmers. What had it done? Number one, in the domain of the government lands, there were large number of government lands, lakhs of acres of lands. These lands were assigned to the poor people, landless poor, mostly Dalits, Adivasis, and the Bahujans,
Exactly.
and also the other poor people. The expectation was they would cultivate this land, they would bring the land under cultivation, and they would derive their livelihood, and they would transfer it to their offspring.
Yes.
It would be inherited. They would not sell the land. So this was not to be treated as a commodity. This was to be treated as a livelihood support to the family.
Was that expected, or was that a binding rule, sir? I mean,
That was a binding rule.
That
was
they
a binding
cannot
rule.
sell it at any
They
cost.
could not sell it. In case if they sold it, which was happened in many a case, it was to be restored back to the original,
to the government.
to the original assignee, or government can resume
Understood.
and use it for some other purposes. But it was not to be traded. It was not a tradable commodity.
Understood.
And because it was meant to be a source of livelihood.
Exactly.
Now, the previous government had abolished this legislation. This had been in vogue from 60s, 70s, 80s. Lakhs of acres of land
Exactly.
had been transferred. Now, had been assigned to poor people. Now, this by false inducement to poor people, by offering money to them in advance, before an act was brought in,
Yes.
regularizing lands of those that were assigned 20 years or earlier, I think the previous government had committed an egregious crime in terms of depriving the poor people of their livelihood support, number one. Number two, has misled them into believing that these lands would be tradable commodities and they would get money. Of course, they did get money, but what did they get? They get a fraction of the money at which the lands were being traded. So, large number of lakhs of people, particularly those who formed the solid vote bank of the previous government, had been cheated out of their livelihood, out of their economy, out of their only source of assets. So this is as far as government lands are concerned. Now let us come to the much more important, which is the Land Titling Act.
Yes.
Now, Land Titling Act, number one, was not required in Andhra Pradesh. Number two, what it did essentially was that you will have to prove, every farmer had to prove that he owned this land.
The onus of proving ownership was on the
correct,
farmer or the land
correct,
owner rather
correct,
than the
correct.
agency which is surveying the land.
Correct. Second, much more importantly, there was the methodology applied, which is a drone system.
Yes.
Now, each drone flying and each photograph is lumped into one localization point, what they call LP. Now, LP could be for 50 acres, could be 100 acres, 150 acres. There could be 200 farmers in that.
Exactly.
150 acres.
Exactly.
That would be one single survey number.
Because
Now,
even today, I think small farmers make for a chunk
exactly.
of the agricultural.
So each small farmer is supposed to bring his documents and also physically show where his land is in this LP.
Exactly.
Now, this benefited, number one, the drone companies. Number two, in the name of fixing stone boundaries, large thousands of crores of contracts were given to granite companies with the chief minister's photograph on that, embossed on the top of that. Third one was the digital companies were given contract to digitize this data. The whole expectation is, and then of course patta was given with the face of the chief minister on the patta. Now this virtually disempowered every single farmer and those farmers run into lakhs. And this includes the landowner as well as the tenant of the land.
Exactly.
Because particularly in coastal Andhra, central coastal Andhra, land holdings are very small.
And more often than not, the owners are not the cultivators.
Exactly. They are not the cultivators. So this has played havoc with the system. This has disempowered, dispossessed a large number of farmers. In Andhra Pradesh, several farmers do not know that they have been dispossessed.
So just to summarize what you've just told us, please correct me if I go wrong anywhere. You basically meant to say that A, the land titling prescription, so to say, or the advice that was given by Niti Aayog was not to Andhra Pradesh, and was Andhra Pradesh need not have taken it as seriously as it took that particular prescription. It was for other territories of India which did not go through the permanent settlement process in 1851, which did not have a concrete system to resolve disputes. And you also feel that the farmers, to an extent, have been disempowered and have been misled by giving only a chunk of what was made of their land back to them. And this immensely benefited the government or certain agencies, so to say. Going forward, the standpoint that they come from, they say this was with an intention of settling all disputes once and for all. But on one hand, we say we want to settle disputes once and for all. But on the other hand, when you told us about the history, I realized technology may not be the answer for every question that is raised by either the public or raised by the situation, so to say. So where do you feel the gap arose, and where do you feel it all went wrong? And to an extent, was the intention in the first place wrong, I would say?
Okay, let me, I think number one, first and foremost, the Niti Aayog prescription, it was meant for those areas that did not go through the Raitwari settlement, mostly the permanent settlement in way back in the 18th century. Second is 18th, 19th centuries. Second is, it did have a role in states like Telangana, northern India. It didn't have much of a role in Andhra Pradesh. However, there were problems in Andhra. It's not that Andhra Pradesh was free from land litigation. What it required was more efficient, more effective land management system. The rules, the regulations, the procedures were all in place. They just simply needed to be implemented. This whole idea that you have a permanent title is misleading the public.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you here, sir. When somebody says permanent titling, how permanent is it? I mean, for all you know, the next government comes around and says it's not permanent.
Yeah. No, I mean, what normally, I mean, what happens across the world is that the sovereign owns all the land.
Yes.
This is the eminent domain doctrine. Doctrine of eminent domain dictates that all land is vested in the sovereign.
Yes.
The sovereign in India are the people.
Yes.
And the government administers the land on their behalf. That is why the government reserves the right to acquire land in public interest. You cannot stop that right.
Exactly.
That is in terms of exercising the doctrine of eminent domain, that the government acquires the land. So the title of the land that is given as a patta, as whatever is the title, is permanent as for you to, number one, trade in it, unless it's a government assignment or government alienation. You can trade, you can sell, you can buy, and you can give it to whomever you want, your successors or your spouse or whoever. So to that extent, your ownership is protected.
Yes.
So this logic, this argument by the previous government was disingenuous. It had absolutely no basis. It arose from two reasons. One reason in my view was poor understanding of land administration, and IAS officers are not expected to have deep insight or deep knowledge of the land administration because they do million things. This is one among that. And I was one of those few who have had the fortune of working deeply, because I worked in some of those areas in Telangana which were not settled and surveyed. So I know I have had the advantage of conducting a survey, settlement, and then
first-hand experience of dealing with land.
I mean, what was meant under the Land Titling Act. The second one was here. The second logic was essentially asking the owner title holder to prove his own ownership title. Number two, to show his own land. When you have land maps available, you have the records available. Now, why should, where is the need to, you place the onus on the farmer? Third, more important is the domain of the civil courts was excluded. And the revenue courts, already revenue courts are overburdened,
Yes.
they are poorly managed, essentially the problems have arisen in the land domain essentially because of poor land administration. So this entire effort, in my view, was meant to benefit drone flyers, stone planters, and those who digitize this information. I would like to believe, in all good faith, that the intention was essentially to trace how much land Akash holds in Andhra Pradesh or how much land that Ramesh holds, and then go after those who are not liked by the party in power. So I do not believe the intentions were honest. I do not believe the process was fair, and I do believe that it is. And I'm very happy that this government, one of its earliest decisions is to do away with the legislation. And I now believe what this government must do is to go back to where it was 20 years back before the webland came into existence, restore back the adangals, restore back the record of rights, trace out the record, put it in the public domain.
Exactly.
Let every farmer know where it is. Where subdivisions need to be made, obviously, if the father dies and the children inherit, you need to do a subdivision.
Exactly.
Or if a landowner sells it to two different people, they perhaps would have to be subdivided.
Exactly.
So this exercise, the updatement of the records, is what is required. I think I personally believe both webland in Andhra and the Dharani portal in Telangana have done huge damage to the real owners and farmers of the land. It has enabled land grabbers to grab large chunks of valuable urban properties and expropriate land at a price. And I think this is a huge crime. This must be dealt. Telangana has done away with the Land Grabbing Act, whereas it is still valid in Andhra. The government must do a series of reforms. It must appoint senior people who have experience in land administration, restore back, and then all the land that has been grabbed in the name of assignments, assigned lands, as well as the pata lands. Then there needs to be a comprehensive investigation into this, and the lands must be restored back. Otherwise, it must be taken to the government domain, so that the government could benefit from this. It could use it to establish industrial parks, industrial special economic zones.
For the development of the state.
Yeah, for the development of the state. Monetize those lands. So I think the time has come. This has been one of the biggest, this is among the several irregularities and crimes committed by the previous government. This stands at the forefront because of the fact that 60% of the people are dependent on land, and then this was also extended to urban lands.
Exactly.
In fact, urban resurvey has not started. Had it started, it would have created havoc with the ownership of the...
Because it's a popular belief that most of the power centers sit in the urban areas. So, taking away from your answer, one very simple thing that came to my head as we're doing this, in fact, like you just said, the onus of proving that this is my land is on the farmer. In this case, let me assume I'm the farmer. I need to go and prove to the authority that this is my land. I need to show them the boundaries. Whereas the government already holds land maps and land records through which that verification process could have been done.
Correct.
Now, my doubt is, in the process of wanting to settle disputes, aren't you creating more?
More.
Because there will obviously be a dispute. Correct. When an official comes up to me, I might feel my boundary starts from X point.
Correct.
But it could be that the land records that the government has say something different.
Correct.
So in this case, when you are giving the farmer the responsibility of demarcating his land,
correct.
In my opinion, again, just a question for you, it could create more disputes, first. Second, does this also leave gap for certain influential people in that vicinity to come in and influence the process in a way where boundaries are altered as per their vested interests?
You're spot on, and let me cite my own personal example. My father owned 11.6 acres of land, his own patta land. He acquired it by his hard work. He passed away in October last year. I've applied for mutation of that land.
Yes.
And he had given a written will saying that 3 sons will inherit that equally. So
Yes.
that 11 acres was to be divided between the 3. This incidentally was converted into a fish tank in 2003 after obtaining permission.
Yes.
2003. Now this is a patta land. Now this land was to be mutated. So I applied for a mutation. Tahsildar rejects to mutate. I go back and check with the collector what is to be done. I send a letter to the RDO because the land was not mutated and notices were being issued in the name of my dead father, which was no address at all.
Obviously.
So I came to know about this, and when I sent a letter saying that, please send letters to me, it was not even received. Registered letters were not received and instead were returned. I was a former Special Chief Secretary to the government of Andhra Pradesh. And this is considered held by courts as a serious dereliction of public duty by a public servant. 100%. This was RDO. Then when I went to collector says your 11.6 acres is part of a location point, which is 72 acres.
Now you have to resurvey the entire thing.
And it's a fish tank. And fish tank is 120 acres. So this location point is 72 acres, is middle of a fish tank. He says, can you show me the land?
Okay. So the onus is on you.
And then RDO, what she does is she drains the fish tank.
Your land gets flooded.
With fish. Is dried up. So a loss of crores of rupees of land, of wealth, instead of promoting aquaculture, the entire thing had been drained out. The fish culture had been stalled for 1 year. And then I'm being asked to come and show where my land is. And whereas the truth of the matter is, because I had never been in my village in the last 35 years, I have no idea where the land is. This is what precisely government is supposed to do. The revenue authorities have the land record, have land holding details, have the record of rights, have the map. And so finally I went in appeal to the Chief Commissioner of Land Administration. He had given orders in my favor. They are yet to be implemented today.
So one thing, if a person like you, who's worked in the same administration as a Special Chief Secretary in the past, has held multiple portfolios, let's be honest, with that comes access. With that comes a ear that people are ready to listen to you. If a person like you is facing this, what would be the plight of an average citizen who wants to get this done?
I cannot imagine. I mean, is it, unless people are still ignorant? I mean, I really urge the farmers of every single holding in Andhra Pradesh to go to the revenue officer and check up if their land title and if their land is still safe or not. This is first point. The second is the onus should be on the revenue authorities today to restore back status quo ante prior to what existed in 2019. Because I think the mess had taken place between 2019 and 2024. And thirdly, they must reintroduce the old system of field measurement books, of adangal, of record of rights, and that must be in the public domain. And Jamabandi must be restored back. Land administration, Andhra Pradesh land administration must be put back on its rails. There is a limits to what digital media can do, technology can do. Technology is not a substitute for human intervention.
Never.
And it can enable you, it can empower you, it can enhance you, but cannot substitute you.
In fact, here I'd like to give you an excerpt. Even in the journalism industry, I think there was one channel abroad which tried having a robot doing a news bulletin. What they faced after a point was the robot monotonously speaks about the news irrespective of whether or not the news is related to somebody's demise or a happy event.
Correct.
So emotion is something that technology does not understand.
Correct.
And in a land is something that is very emotional to the farmers.
Correct.
A lot of times these disputes do not arise from materialistic stuff, but more often than not, this comes from an emotion that they've cultivated over a period of, say, a decade or more than that. Coming to the next aspect, sir, I think you just said that, things need to go back to what they were pre-2019. Now, this also brings up a very major problem whenever we discuss Andhra Pradesh as a state, as an ideal, spot for investment, etc. A lot of companies today and a lot of key strategic power holders, stakeholders in the corporate wing as well, today I look at Andhra Pradesh having a very precarious situation, so to say, from an investment perspective. Primarily because I think a lot that was done between 14 and 19 was reversed between 19 and 24. And now the government which ruled between 14 and 19 is back. As somebody who understands policy best, how do you look at this? Because not always is it white and black, but there are a lot of grays in which the administration operates. And how do you look at this from the perspective of a corporate person? I'm going to go invest my money into Andhra Pradesh today. What if things go back to square one and I can't do anything about it? I think there was one very famous example also of one project moving from Andhra to Telangana after the allotted land was pulled back as soon as the previous government came to power.
Correct.
So how do you look at this, and eventually what is going to be the detrimental impact on the state of Andhra Pradesh because of all of this?
Now, broadly, Andhra Pradesh as a state had been investor friendly for a fairly long time. If you see, especially with the leadership of Mr. Naidu, starting in 1995, the Hyderabad, as you know, is megalopolis today, is a hub for investors.
He's credited for a lot of that development.
Absolutely. So I think and that trend continued through the 2004 after he demitted office as well, and up to 2014. And 2014 he again state divided, and then Andhra Pradesh was certainly considered again a hub because a large number of investments were made in terms of developing Vizag-Chennai corridor, Chennai-Bangalore industrial corridor, several industrial nodes,
yes,
and special economic zones, development of ports, because Andhra has the unique advantage of, number one, a long coastline, number two, land which is investor friendly, number three is it has all the ingredients like power, water, trained manpower. So all this together, you have the right ingredients for any investor to come and invest, and that's how Vizag developed, the Sri City has developed, and several other areas in Andhra have come up. It's the last 5 years, I must say, because I've been part of that government, was an unfortunate anti-investor government. It's an aberration. It's not the norm. And I do hope that it would never come back again to power. I think investors, ideally, in an ideal situation, the change of governments ought not to influence the investor trajectory.
Yes.
If I am an investor, I'm setting up a corporate enterprise, a manufacturing, a service enterprise, or an IT enterprise in Andhra Pradesh. It hardly matters who the MLA is or the MP is, as long as the government is favorable. It doesn't intrude into me.
Exactly.
It doesn't conduct a surveillance and raids. As long as I'm honest, I'm tax paying, I'm generating income, I'm providing employment. Now, as long as that balance is maintained, I ought not to be troubled.
Trouble at all.
Yeah. So I do believe that investors must now have confidence in this government, and Mr. Naidu has a long track record, 30 plus years of track record of being investor friendly, understanding what it is for economic development to take place. So I do believe that things have changed, are changing, and will change for the better.
Okay, and this precarious situation that we're talking about right now, sir, I think it stems back to a fundamental policy decision that was taken by the previous government, that we are going to be a welfare government. Now, the word welfare in today's context across the country, I think, is used in multiple connotations and has become very ambiguous, so to say. Does welfare mean freebies? Does welfare mean that you empower your population to stand up on their own feet? These are two completely different narratives. And a lot of as you said, anti-investor, as the media today is calling it, or a lot of key voices are calling it, anti-investor tradition or that attitude also stems from this fundamental policy decision that was taken. And as a consequence, we also today see that the state may not be in the best of shapes that it could have been in had things been done right. So, with respect to this policy decision that we will be an out and out welfare government and development will take a back seat, how do you think this fared and how do you look at this policy decision? Because trust me, AP and Telangana, even up north, are considered to be the most aspirational populations. People in Andhra Pradesh are very aspirational. They want to see, if a Hyderabad was developed in United Andhra Pradesh, I'm pretty sure there's a dream of developing something above that or even something similar at the same level. So, how do you see this policy decision that was taken in 2019 and how did that go about?
No, this is an interesting and very important question to have a clarity. Now just compare, let me just step back to look at what had been the development trajectory. 2014, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, an average per capita income was about 1,60,000, 1,50,000 or so. At constant prices, today the per capita income of Telangana is the highest in the country,
yes,
at around 3.5 lakh rupees, whereas Andhra is around 2,60,000.
Yes.
So it figures somewhere in between the 28 states.
Yes.
So, I mean, that is a clear indication that Andhra Pradesh in terms of the economic growth has seriously fallen behind. This is the first problem. The second problem is the structure of the economy of Andhra Pradesh is limiting because nearly 40% of the GDP of the state still comes from agriculture.
Yes.
And only about 18 to 19% is industry and the rest is services, and which is very, very different. If you take country as a whole, the agriculture constitutes less than 20% of the GDP nationally, and that includes aquaculture, livestock, everything. So Andhra Pradesh is still continues to be intensely rural, intensely agriculture, and large number of population are still dependent on agriculture. So that's the framework.
Yeah.
Number two is this binary that welfare is what drives my government, development does not drive my government, or vice versa, I think is really infantile. It is really people who don't understand governance, who have absolutely no idea about what the rule, the responsibilities, the role of governance is. Those people, and it's really unfortunate, it's not only the political executive that believed in this, that the so-called freebies, I mean distribution of cash, let's not even call it a freebies, distribution of cash in the name of elderly people, in the name of schools, in the name of something else, hawkers.
The list is endless.
And the list is endless, 50,000, 60,000 crores a year. Now, this cash distribution, let me step back and say, so this is a simplistic understanding of what the governance is all about. And it also failure of not just of the political establishment, but it's also failure of the bureaucracy, of the intellectuals, of academia, and overall people of Andhra Pradesh. Because somebody should have stood up and said, this is the way that the government ought to work. What is the role of the government? Why do you have the governments? Governments are not there. I mean, particularly in a democracy. See, we've evolved from the days of hunting, gathering zones to
a civilized society.
To roving bandits, to settled bandits, to established kingdoms, to democracy. We've come very, very far away. And in a democracy, what's the role of the government? Government, number one, needs to protect the citizens. First responsibility, safety, security of the citizens.
Yeah.
Now, not oppressive security, not surveillance security, but the security that ensures that the citizen is enhanced, feels protected, that the enforcement machinery exists for his good. This is number one. Number two, the government must ensure that the contracts are respected, enforced, that there is a rule of law. Constitution, legislation, rules, regulations are respected, and the governance is conducted in accordance with the rule of law. Number
Exactly.
two. Number three is the public services. What are those public services? Public services may be provided free, provided for a price. But public services, I need transport for which I need good roads.
Exactly.
So that I can move from place to place. And I need drinking water, safe drinking water. I do not get diarrhea and other diseases.
Exactly.
I need power so that I can run my industry, I can run my domestic establishments. I need sanitation so that it's clean. I need housing. These are public services.
Yes.
You may price them. You may price them appropriately as a service provider, or you may ask a private sector entity to provide those services and price them. Or if you believe that the poor people cannot afford, you may subsidize that from the government. Where does the government money? So this is one, public services. The third is you need to protect those who are weak,
The downtrodden.
the downtrodden, the elderly, those who are physically challenged, those who cannot help themselves. Those people need to be helped.
Exactly.
Now, cash transfers globally have been, there's been a lot of talk about universal basic income. It has not really been proved anywhere except in countries like Sweden, Norway, to a limited extent. These are countries which are small, which are homogeneous.
Their population
and
comparatively is negligible
yes,
compared
exactly.
to India.
And then they are homogeneous societies. They're societies which believe in each other.
Yes.
Believe in, they trust everybody. That's why in Nordic countries, the people pay 50% of their income as tax.
Yes.
And they don't mind paying 50% because their future, their children's future, their children's education, their health care, everything is provisioned by the government and top class.
Yes.
Now, where cash transfers have worked, in one of the classic example is Brazil, where Bolsa Familia was a well-known program, but they were all conditional cash transfers. That is, you send your child to school and your child attends school,
Exactly.
then you will be paid so much. If you have a child below 5 years, if the child is immunized, you will get so much money. So everything is driven in such a way that the children, women, number one, they have good health care, they have safe livelihoods, they have education, they have health care. So if you give cash away, that's fine. I mean, you need to give cash certainly to some people. But the problem is, what do you do with cash? I can't eat money.
Exactly.
I use money to buy services.
Exactly.
I buy goods. If those goods are expensive, if those services are not available, then what do I do with money?
Exactly.
So this is the system of governance in which protection, rule of law, public services, social support, service, social safety net. This is social safety net. Why I've retired, I get pension. Why do I get pension? Because I served the nation,
Exactly.
I served the
It's
people.
payback time.
So it's a payback time for me. Now, these you cannot say you're giving cash transfers to Ramesh.
Obviously.
So you have to see it as an integrated mix. Number two, what is all this? How do you grow the economy? If the economy does not grow, if obviously you cannot distribute, you cannot create employment. You have to diversify your economy. You have to grow the economy. You have to grow the economy through increasing productivity, through investments, through technology, through hard work, through creating employment.
And to an extent,
creating
direct cash
infrastructure.
direct
To creating
cash
infrastructure.
transfers, to an extent, according to a lot of people, are acting against the development of capabilities.
Yes, I mean, in a way, if you tell me, don't go anywhere, sit in your home, we will give you everything that you want, and
I wouldn't want to work.
So why should I work? Where is the incentive? We won't call it a growth of laziness, but what happens is the society stops working hard. See, no society in the world, any society in the world has developed without working hard. Hard work must be a fundamental principle and practice. I mean, I'm what I am because I worked very hard.
Exactly.
And nothing has come easy to me. So when there may be a few gamblers who have benefited from gambling, but gambling cannot be a universal principle for development.
Exactly. So, as somebody who spent so many years in the state of Andhra Pradesh, one thing that from the outside seems very hard to execute, and I'm talking about the three capital issue. In a condition where you see that Hyderabad is the headquarters, all the three wings of the government operate out of Hyderabad, for example. Even today, because of protocols and government established SOPs, so to say, there is a delay in terms of work happening or work being executed or any plan being executed for that matter. In a situation where all three headquarters of your wings are 1,000 kilometers apart, was that even because I have my sources telling me that on the day that it was announced on the floor of the house that a study was done and a global organization was the one which did the survey, I was given to believe that it was not planned at all. That announcement was not planned at all and nobody was ready to take it at that juncture. Was it prematurely done, and was it a political move, or was it a move to benefit three different regions of Andhra Pradesh the way it was portrayed? And as a bureaucrat, if you can explain to us, was this even practically possible? Because a bureaucrat who has to shuffle between the three wings, it's almost impossible to do that at the time gap that exists. So the journey or the time taken to travel from one particular headquarters to another. So how do you look at this entire move, and where do you think this stemmed from?
No, I was part of the government till October 2020, which was almost about 17, 18 months. The issue was never discussed. This issue was never discussed. The only thing that it was discussed was that nothing should be done with Amravati. And I think there was a bias and a prejudice against Amravati being the capital. And this three capital thing was a red herring basically thrown in order for speculative growth of in land prices in these areas. There was never a noble idea in this. There was never a rational thinking in this. And this idea had germinated from one of the bureaucrats himself, and who's perhaps is reasonably well known. And this was purchased in a way to see almost the previous government was looking, or at least the leader of the government was looking at what is in it for me or for my party. So I think this was basically a speculative enterprise. Nothing happened. No capital ever came up. No development ever took place, and nothing ever happened.
It was mere lip service, is how it seems today.
Exactly. And what it happened was a complete decimation of a capital that was already in progress, under construction progress. So Amravati, call it whatever it is. You see, capital city is important in a way where you have the administration, you have the legislature and the high court at one place. So because they are mutually interdependent, they are interconnected. They cannot be, you can work here. What you could do decentrally, the way that things work, let's take United States. Now, the New York City or Chicago or San Francisco, which are the biggest cities they are not capital cities.
Yes.
The capital is somewhere else. In each of the states, capital is somewhere else. So, in United States, they have very carefully identified what are the growth opportunities in each place. Boston, apart from a port city, it's educational hub.
Yes.
You have large educational institutions. New York is a financial center. So you got to look at opportunities. There are multiple opportunities. Vizag in Andhra can grow phenomenally fast because it's a coastal city, it's a port city.
Yes.
It's a multicultural,
the defense
it's a cosmopolitan, it's a center for the naval command. So, like that, every single place in Andhra Pradesh can grow. The way to grow really is to grow the urban centers, particularly tier 2, tier 3 cities. It's not by the government is not the growth engine. Government is one of the growth engines. Government is a facilitator, as an enabler, as an empowerer of growth. It is not by itself, does not generate growth. Because apart from the employees, what does the government have?
Exactly.
Of course they consume goods, they consume services, so in a way they drive, but that's limited. You want everyone. How many people are employed? There are 6 lakh people are employed in a state of 6 crore people. Now, what about the remaining people? You see, you need everyone to grow, everyone to have minimum services. So, how do you have this wider distribution of services? Is essentially every area must have growth opportunities, employment opportunities, services, your good education, good healthcare. What do you want for your children? You want good education, good health,
Quality basic
quality
amenities.
of quality, good services, a housing, a water supply, sanitation, transport, ease of living. How do you live in a way that there is people feel the livelihood living in the state
Understood.
is easy.
Sir, the three capitals issue was not the only thing that was spoken about so much, but not implemented. The other aspect is the complete prohibition of liquor. This has been drawn from states like Bihar, states like Gujarat, etc. How do you look at prohibition in the first place? Is it necessary, or is regulating the sale of liquor the more ideal option according to you as a policy professional? Second aspect, how do you look at this phase-wise prohibition that was done? Eventually, it was promised that maybe in the fourth or the fifth year, or by the end of the term, complete prohibition would be implemented. That obviously was not done. I think it's from this very case that the whole 99.9% of the manifesto comes in, where 0.1% was the prohibition of liquor according to them. So how do you look at the liquor policy, and how do you think it impacted the state at two multiple levels? One, the idea of it, the principle of it. B, the process of execution that was followed by those in power.
I just want to step back and talk about the manifesto as the Bible and Bhagavad Gita of any political party. Now, manifesto certainly expresses the strategy, the vision, the priorities of the political party, so that the voters know exactly what this party will offer for me.
Exactly.
Now, it used to be in terms of ideology, ideals, ideation.
The core of the
This is the substance that this political party offers me. Now, later it has become, I will distribute this, I'll give this, so much money.
Became a list of promises.
It's a list of a catalog of those goodies that would be distributed. Now, you do not know when you are contesting elections, particularly if you are not in power, what are your resources, how much revenues. You see, government is not an Akshaya Patra. It doesn't have inexhaustible resources. It has fixed resources, and they come from the people. It's the people's money.
Exactly.
And it is supposed to be used for the good of the people. So this sort of a blind adherence that I have faithfully followed Bhagavad Gita, and so I deserve salvation, I think is an absurd proposition to begin with. Now, I don't think any God is likely to admit you to heaven, saying that, I have lived by your book, by your scripture, and so reward me with a heaven for an eternal bliss. So I think that is proven with this.
In fact, I was going to ask you right now that despite fulfilling 99.9%, again, quote unquote, because that is the figure quoted by the party and the former chief minister, despite all of that, the election didn't go their way. And
Right.
not only did it not go their way,
Correct.
this today is being termed not even as a landslide victory. This is seen as an outright rejection
Correct.
of one particular entity.
Correct.
In this case, the YSRC.
Correct.
So why do you think, obviously people enjoyed getting money. It's not like they didn't want the schemes. But despite all of that, the results transpiring in the way that they did, how do you see that? Is this a clear indication in your opinion that schemes alone or welfare alone is not enough for an aspirational population?
No, this requires a more comprehensive answer, because people, there are multiple moving pieces. I think one of the major, this is an absolute rejection of Mafia Raj. This was essentially, the previous government had no respect for rule of law, no respect for constitution. It had no respect for economic growth, it didn't create any employment. All it did was distributed money, thinking that by this was a way of bribing and buying votes. People rejected that. People said we want good governance. Good governance means all round enabling environment. We need jobs for our children. We need ease of living. We need public services which are reliable, which are fairly. And you cannot have a system by which few people extract public resources and have scant respect for rule of law and then simply distribute money and then expect to win elections. People are wise. People are wise, and Andhra people are intelligent, they're educated, they're aspirational, they look at the future generations rather than the past. I mean, so I think it was hugely wasted 5 long years for the party in power, for the government, for the officials, for the people. I think it's a disaster, and that disaster will continue to haunt the state for a long time to come. And I'm saying this with all responsibility, and I'm not saying this out of spite, because I'm somebody who's not affiliated with any party. I'm not speaking for A party or B party, but I'm trying to speak the truth as I understood, because I had been part of this government, I'd been part of the previous government, I'd been part of the Congress governments.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter, the very belief that when the one party loses election, it's not the old dictatorships, or it's not the old Raja. You are not running a kingdom. You are not running a kingdom. It's a government, is a continuum.
On that note, my next question actually is on the similar lines, sir. There's this popular belief, and when we used to interact with voters and stakeholders during the election time, during the campaign period, a lot of people were of the opinion that no industry was left untouched. Right from tickets of movies to lands, to builders, to real estate, every industry to an extent, if not controlled, I would say there was an attempt to control the cash flow in that particular industry. How do you look at that, and is that what you meant by Mafia Raj?
I had a sense, whether during my presence and thereafter, that there was a sense, there was a feeling that we have overthrown the previous regime. Now that the Delhi Sultanate is gone, there's a new emperor in place, and now the emperor has a new law. And what he says is the law, and it would prevail. Number one. Number two is every resource in my kingdom belongs to me. This is the eminent domain doctrine, that everything belongs to the sovereign. I am the sovereign. It belongs to me. Number three, all those who work for me, they are my personal employees, whether they slave for me or not, but I expect them to be loyal and comply with my orders. The fourth is that the citizens must be grateful for what they receive from me. If you speak out loud, whether you're media, whether you're a social media, whether you are speaking out of turn, you have no business to be in my kingdom. Now, this was reminiscent of the old medieval kingdoms. This did not belong to 21st century.
And again, just a comparison. You've been a part of the Congress government as well. The head of that government was the father of the person who was ruling the state between 19 and 24. As a human being who's been very closely associated with the administration, sir, do you at any point, when you compare both the regimes, is there a stark difference in the way it was dealt with in your personal experience? Again, I say this and you can choose not to answer that, but from your experience, I just want to know, is there a stark difference? Because right now, from what I understand, somebody else is taking claim to the legacy. So, do you believe that, because a lot of times Rajana Rajyam was actively used and pumped into the population and was driven home. So, because from what I believe and based on what the research says, a lot of schemes that were implemented during the chief ministership of Mr. Chandrababu Naidu were actually carried on during the YSR regime, and the schemes implemented by Mr. YSR were also carried on during the TDP regime post that. So there was, to an extent, a cordial exchange of ideas, And people were okay with certain schemes which were good for the people continuing during their term also. But that was not seen this time around. So what sort of a differentiating factor do you see in both these regimes?
I mean, right from 1947, when India became independent, it still continued with some of the elements of the British Raj. 1950 onwards, when the Planning Commission, and 1952, when the new elections came, governments changed. I mean, broadly it was Congress government, but there were other parties as well in power, and that continued. And I had been in civil service from 85 onwards, and we had seen several governments. When I became IAS officer, N.T. Ramarao was the chief minister. Then Chandra Reddy came, then Janardhan Reddy came, then Vijay Bhaskar Reddy.
So you saw the transition from godlike heroes becoming chief
correct,
ministers to now...
Correct. And then NTR came back, and then Chandrababu Naidu. And within 6 months after he became chief minister, I went abroad. I got an opportunity to work for International Fund for Agriculture Development. And I came back only in 2009, few months before Mr. Rajshekhar Reddy died. And then, of course, Roshaya and then Kiran Kumar Reddy. You see, government, the chief ministers come and go. They do bring energy, they do bring in ideas, they bring in priorities, they have certain directions that they give, and they want certain things to be done a particular way, but the government is a continuum.
Yes.
That is why you have the IAS, IPS, IFS officers, essentially to ensure that there's a continuity. What is important for the people, continue. They may be modified, like rice, subsidized rice at 2 rupees, which Mr. N.T. Ramarao introduced. It continues till today. So, pensions for elderly, which was started long time back, it continues till today. So, I think there are certain things which are for the good of the people, building water supply schemes, building roads, building sanitation programs,
for that matter,
health, hospitals. So this is a continuum. You see, it doesn't start or end with somebody. Similarly, I have seen when governments change, when they are unpaid bills, those get paid by the next government because it's a continuum. It's a government continues. Now, there was a complete rupture with this, with 2019 was a complete rupture from the traditions set in 1947 to 2019. This was a complete rupture which never seen before. It was felt as if that all the previous regimes had been overthrown and a new era starts. It is like how the Japanese emperor, when he is coronated, a new era starts with the Japanese emperor.
Exactly.
Now it was something similar, that new era has started, but even Japanese government policies, priorities, programs don't change.
Exactly.
Only the era changes, the calendar changes. But here, everything changed.
So before going into the land, liquor and a couple of other policies and we end this discussion, a very important aspect that I've noticed is a lot is spoken about the politicians, and you've said a couple of lines and you've quoted the bureaucracy as well. I think the bureaucracy also needs to be discussed at some level. I very starkly remember an IS officer that I was talking to telling me that politicians maybe play a 5-year game, we play a 35-year game, right? I mean, chief ministers come and go, but the bureaucracy is still there. What is the role of the bureaucracy, considering the damage, as you say, in the past 5 years? What should have been the role of the bureaucracy in ensuring that this does not happen? Because at the end of the day, without the help of the bureaucracy, I'm pretty sure that a politician cannot function and execute things to this level.
Correct.
Second point, because you've been a part of the mechanism, how was the behavior of the previous government with respect to senior bureaucrats? I mean, ruptures were unearthed. They made headlines a lot of times. So, from that standpoint, what do you feel should have been and could not have been the role of the bureaucracy?
No, this is a very important question because the bureaucracy is an important ingredient of governance. And Constitution of India, unlike many other constitutions, provide specific protection to all India services, that their services are protected. Their main purpose is that they retain autonomy from arbitrary political pressures, not political priorities, but arbitrary political pressures, that they are subordinate to the Constitution of India. They will uphold the Constitution in letter and spirit. They will act by the rules, regulations, procedures established by law. So the rule of law is upheld and remains supreme. Third is that good and bad of the public interest. What works, what does not work, what is good for the people, what is not good for the people is clearly explained. And much more importantly, when the government changes and the government has priorities, these are critically examined.
Yes.
Vis-a-vis the possibilities, the probability, the resources available, implementation potential, what is the downside, what is the upside, and these are explained, these are discussed threadbare, and then only they are operationalized. Laws are made. Now each one of them, lot of consultation goes in, thinking goes in, discussions go in, several meetings are held before things formed, before things are unrolled. Now what happened in the between 2019 2024 was the emperor came with a manifesto. It was like Moses bringing 10 commandments. So he says that these are Navaratnalu. These Navaratnalu have to be implemented. No debate, no discussion.
It was imposed, you're saying?
It was simply told, this is what I want. No officer stood up and said that we could, yes, these are your priorities. By all means, as a political leader who's won a sweeping election, you have every right to get these things done. Give us time. We will work a methodology by which we will harmonize public interest, rules, regulations, resources with the execution of the project.
While keeping the sanctity of bureaucracy being autonomous.
None of that was done. None of that was done at any point of time. Those of us, unfortunately, I was inside his office, and when I sought to raise some of these issues, sanctity of contracts, following adherence to rule of law, making laws that consistent with the constitution, I was derided. No one stood up for me at that time. And I blame, today there may be officers who may be talking big. The chief secretary, this principal advisor to chief minister, the various chief secretaries, principal secretaries, why didn't they stand up and say, number one, we could do it differently, or we could do it better, or these are the limitations by which we cannot undertake this. We cannot. This is not a dacoit's paradise.
Could you sense fear?
Of course. No. I do not know. I think you see, when we lose our moral fiber, when ourselves are, if I am corrupt, if I am inept, if I have vested interests, then obviously I don't have the courage of conviction.
Exactly.
So if I'm competent in my work, if I'm upright beyond question, and my commitment is to public interest, I obviously stand up. I've stood up all my career.
Exactly.
So if I could do it, why can't the others do?
Exactly.
So I think there was some people might have had skeletons rattling in their drawing rooms, quite possible. Number two, they may had their own vested interests, their children, they might have been a fear. More important, to a large extent, I felt that they didn't have the moral fiber to stand up and say, this is not
how it's supposed to be done. So coming to the two most debated policies, if you ask me, in the past 5 years in the state of Andhra Pradesh, I think we briefly touched upon liquor, but we digressed into another topic. A is the liquor policy. There have been multiple angles to this. One is prohibition necessary? And the second aspect of this question is the way it was executed, the way the quality of liquor being served was compromised upon to a great extent, according to a lot of people. Spurious liquor leading to health issues for regular consumers. And how do you look at the entire sand landscape? I think there was a recent, free sand policy that was rolled out by the present day administration. So how do you as a bureaucrat analyze both of these things, and how important are they for the state's financial health?
Okay, let's break this up into elements. Alcohol is a drug, like any other drug, like smoking.
It's addictive.
Not good for health. It certainly affects health. It has downside. It impacts longevity in the long term. Having said that, uh, alcohol prohibition has not worked anywhere in the world. We know in 1920s, United States for 10 long years struggled with that. The result was that there was a big mafia that grew up there. Andhra itself tried with liquor in 1994.
Mr. NTR's,
When NTR, when he came back, he imposed prohibition, and it didn't work out because bootlegging, illegal manufacturing of liquor, they gained hands. So number one, of course, is because human nature being what it is, when there is a demand, there has to be a supply. The supply, do you supply a liquor that is harmful to you, dangerous to you, a killer brew, or do you license that? So this is, and second is, if people have the money to buy, why not? Why not
get better quality?
Get better quality. Now, the what I mean, number one, of course, I mean the one of the Navaratna priorities or the manifesto was prohibition. Now, how far was the prohibition implemented in reality? Now, instead of prohibition being implemented, it was privatized. It was nationalized. What was in the private domain was brought into the nationalized. Earlier, only the wholesale management used to be in the public domain,
depots.
In the government at the wholesale level. The outlets used to be run by the private individuals.
Yes.
So it was said that, okay, the private is being run by mafia, so let the government take over. So now, after having taken over, the problem was not only with the outlets, because I'm told one thing was it was all cash transactions. Number two was the supply of liquor was handed over to monopoly contractors who started manufacturing liquor that was customized for Andhra Pradesh, which was low quality, high price. Now, consequently, those standard brands were kept out of Andhra Pradesh. So, what essentially happened and during the last regime was all the resources which had potential for generating huge revenue, like sand, land, mines, liquor, these were all monopolized by individuals who were part of the ruling clique. They controlled the entire management of this to the detriment of the state exchequer, public interest, and public resources.
Exactly. So going forward, coming to the financial health of the state of Andhra Pradesh right now, and this would possibly be the last topic that I discuss with you today. I mean, we've seen multiple reports. We still don't have a confirmation. Honestly, waiting for the present day government to release a white paper detailing where the debt stands as on date, how it has progressed in the past 5 years or since division for that matter. But the larger assumption is that the debt as on date is upwards of 10 lakh crores. When we look at that figure, the popular assumption across industries, across sectors is that is this irreversible is the question that is being raised. How do you look at the financial status of the state of Andhra Pradesh? And do you believe that this particular aspect is also going to throw up a lot of hurdles for the present day government in terms of implementing what they want to implement?
Let me break this down into its elements. Number one is we do not know the quantum of debt that has accumulated. It could be 10 lakh crores, it could be 15 lakh crores. That perhaps some contours of that would be known when the white paper is released in the next few days. I hope it would capture the complexity, because what the previous government had done, it was utterly fiscally irresponsible. You see, when you run your home, each one of us, I mean, the state is nothing but like a home. It's a large home. And where there is income, there's expenditure.
Yes.
Some expenditure is fixed, and then you have some surplus.
Yes.
And or if some expenditure you don't have enough money, you borrow. So the government public exchequer is of people's management. Now, what has happened in the previous government is, number one, they were living beyond the means. If the income from all sources in a month, all sources, that means state taxation, the revenue, non-tax revenues, central transfers, central assistance, all put together, uh, let me say a ballpark figure of 14,000 crores. The expenditure was 21,000 crores.
Yes.
Now, where do I get that
Additional 7,000
7,000 crores? Now, 7,000 crores I borrow, right? Now, that exponentially increases. From 7,000 crores, it becomes 8,000, 9,000. Now, to Constitution, Article 293(3) has provided that the state government cannot borrow without the permission of the central government. And every finance commission, now the 15th Finance Commission has said that 3.5% of your state gross domestic product is what you can borrow. And the state's banker, transaction advisor, is the Reserve Bank of India. So the Reserve Bank of India, you get an approval from central government, you go to Reserve Bank of India and you raise debt. This is what is on the government books. This may average between 45,000 to 55,000 from year to year, because, I mean, let me also be very upfront and blunt, that the data relating to domestic product, both at the national level and at the state level, has become very dodgy.
Yes.
Some, Andhra Pradesh claims its GSDP now last year was 14 lakh 85,000 crores. God knows whether it is 14 lakh or 10 lakhs, because it's based on doubtful data and validity.
So it has been questioned multiple times.
Let's leave that aside. So based on that 14 lakh odd crores, 14 lakh 85,000 crores, you are given 3.5% of that to borrow. That's what you are expected to borrow via Reserve Bank and use it. Normally, norm is this, that revenue expenditure, which basically means your revenues and your expenditure must match, and anything over and above that, if you borrow, that must go into capital expenditure.
Yes.
Capital expenditure, infrastructure, services, that will generate long-term wealth.
Basically meaning borrow and invest if you think ROI.
Exactly. You borrow money, I borrow money to build a house. Why? Because it is an asset. It grows in value, plus I don't need to pay rent. I live in comfort.
Exactly.
When I live in comfort, I have, so it's a similar thing. So suppose if I keep buying so that I can have biryani 5 times a day, instead of building a house, I can do that. So what would happen to me?
One day you'll go bankrupt.
Exactly. And I will go bankrupt on one side. Other side, I will get deceased because I'm eating too much. I'll become obese and have diabetes and blood pressure. So this is exactly this. So this is only part of the problem. That is, you borrow at unsustainable levels based on dodgy data. But it didn't stop there. The major problem comes because much of the borrowing has taken place outside the books of the government. What no state had ever done, and it is a template that ought not to be followed by any state, but it would be the fantasy of any state government to follow the template of last 5 years.
So when you say outside the books of the government, can you be a little specific? Because I think that is what the audience would like to understand.
So the outside the books of the government is that you have a corporation. Let us say you have the mining corporation. Mining corporation has some assets, it has some mines. Now what you do is, those mines, based on that mines, you raise a non-convertible debentures, which is basically a long-term debt. So I have assets and then I raise bonds.
And the collateral is the mines.
Collateral is the mines, collateral is the government. Second, power companies. I go to power companies, I mortgage the power companies' assets and I borrow money. I am not generating any revenue in either of these cases. Government is saying that I will pay it back from you. 2. Third is, you float shell companies. Andhra Pradesh Development Corporation, Andhra Pradesh Irrigation Development Corporation, Andhra Pradesh Rayalaseema Drought Mitigation Corporation, Media Corporation. They have no assets, they have no revenues. What I do, government gives a guarantee. Government says, I am guaranteeing that Akash can borrow 50,000 crores. I will pay it back in the next 10 years. It's with interest. And the government calls the various investors, various banks, and says, please give this 50,000 crores to
And
this
based on
company."
the credibility of the state government, this
Government.
particular corporation
Everybody,
gets
because
the-
and particularly when the credit offtake is poor from the private sector, the financial institutions wants to splurge. How do they give money? They give it to government. Government is the safest bet because the notional belief is sovereign never defaults. So this is third. Fourth is revenues, excise revenues, for example, come to the government, 5,000 crores every year. Now, what you do is you give that to 5,000 crores, you give to corporation, beverages corporation, and you say you raise 50,000 crores. Next 10 years, revenues, I securitize. And I give an undertaking saying next 10 years, whatever money comes for excise,
It's going to go into
I
the
will-
repayment of
I
this.
will pay back to that. This is the fifth. Sixth is I sell government assets, land, properties held by them. So monetizing the government revenues, securitizing the future revenues, monetizing the assets, borrowing on the corporations, borrowing on the corporations without revenues, borrowing on shell companies, all this together. That
borrowing outside it.
dimension, it is not in the public domain. We do not know how much it is. It could be anywhere between 5,000 to 5 lakh crores to 8 lakh crores.
This in itself.
This
We're
in
not talking the collective debt of the state of Andhra Pradesh.
So the collective debt would be, as you're saying,
Upwards of 10.
certainly above 10 lakh crores, could be up to 13 or 14 lakh crores. But so you have a large debt hangover on the state. Now, how do you address this? Now, normally, this is unsustainable. It cannot be serviced. Now, whatever income comes, it goes to service the debt. Now, in this, I do believe that there are ways by which this needs to, but this needs a micro analysis. Since I'm not part of the government, I cannot speak on these matters. But there are methodologies by which there is need for a more granular micro analysis of both the revenue, expenditure, debt, and then see whether how do we maximize revenue collection efficiency, how do we optimize expenditure, how do we ensure that the debt is if the investors are willing, could we creditors could go to the creditors and say, can we reschedule or restructure, reformulate, elongate the debt? Instead of 10 years, can I pay back in 30 years? Instead of 10% interest,
Can you bring it down to say 5?
So this needs a lot of negotiation, a lot of discussion, a lot of careful analysis. This would require the new government to moderate, modulate, and carefully calibrate its own new policies. And how do you balance between development and the so-called welfare? And so this government needs to be more responsive, more responsible. I believe that governments need to level with the people, with the citizens, and explain to them this is the situation, these are the challenges.
That's why the question. I believe that every citizen of Andhra Pradesh today should be aware of where certain policies have gotten them.
Correct.
Where is the state at right now?
Correct.
What is the solution from here on?
Correct.
Because a realistic understanding pretty much lets you sleep in peace.
Correct.
You at least have knowledge of what's happening.
Correct.
And I think it's every citizen's right to know that.
Correct.
Taking away from that, sir, like you said, there are multiple solutions. It needs micro-analysis. And like you said, you're not a part of the government today. But given the fact that you've taken us from maybe the 17th, 18th century to what it is today, it's been a beautiful journey. And considering the nuanced understanding you have about finances, your experience with the World Bank and multiple world organizations, if there is an opportunity that comes your way of dealing with this problem firsthand, will you be open to it, or is Mr. PV Ramesh done with that sector of his life?
No, I'm always committed to public service. Anything that would help the state of Andhra Pradesh, this country, anything that helps the public, I'm always prepared to give my time and life and my 24/7 work. I work very hard, and I worked with Mr. Naidu very closely, and it's a pleasure working with him. He's a man of great drive, energy, enthusiasm, vision, and he does require a lot of support in a more substantive way, positive support, positive energy, and I would be happy to be of assistance in whatever way I can. Though I mean, I really do not need, I'm not seeking after any responsibility, but I'm prepared to take up this responsibility.
So that is keeping in picture the larger need of the season, so to say, for the state of Andhra.
It's a need of the country, need of the state, and the future, and the opportunities that exist. Andhra can fairly, if we continue along an expected trajectory for next 10 years, could be well ahead of other states in South India. And
Thank you, sir. Thank you for speaking to us. As the message is loud and clear. If the untapped potential of the state of Andhra Pradesh is unlocked, then there's no turning back. There is still potential. There are solutions that can be carried out to better the situation of the state of Andhra Pradesh. And as Mr. PV Ramesh himself stated, he's open to do that himself. This is Akash Koluru signing off from Hyderabad for Oneindia.